Not everyone thought that FDR was just the greatest. There were plenty of critics of him. We're only going to look at three, but just like in politics today, someone who is seen as a hero to some is a villain to others. First person we're going to look at is Huey Long. Huey Long was from Louisiana. He had been the governor of the state, and he was calling for more. Well, first of all, he was pro FDR. But then he realized that a lot of these federal programs superseded the authority of the state. So he starts calling for more local programs, going back to the old ways of doing things. He said that if he could become president, he was intending to run for president against FDR, he would confiscate anyone's personal fortune over $3 million, and he would make sure that every family got $4,000 to $5,000 to be able to buy what they needed to do. He starts out pro FDR, but turns against him. Again, this idea of the power of the federal government. He even said, though, he knew he was a polarizing figure, and said he knew that he wasn't liked, and in September of 1935, he was assassinated. But we're seeing that there's always going to be people who are critical of the government, who don't like what's going on. But that's one thing that's so wonderful about our system, is that we allow that to happen. Next person I want you to know about is Father Charles Coughlin. Father Coughlin was a Catholic priest, again, originally pro-Roosevelt, and thought that the New Deal was wonderful, that it was providing relief to people. He said very famously, the New Deal is Christ's deal. He believed that this was biblical. And Father Coughlin had a radio address, and again, once the New Deal really starts to go into action, and Father Coughlin sees how much his actions, they are helping individuals, but they are also benefiting big business. So Father Coughlin starts speaking out against FDR on his radio program, says he believes that his actions are unconstitutional, that they are pseudo-capitalistic, and Father Coughlin creates the Union for Social Justice, and that he believes that is more important than some of the economic things that FDR is doing. And in other ways, he's also kind of a villain himself. He was very anti-Semitic and sympathized with Hitler and Mussolini. But the clip we watched in class of him speaking, he is a charismatic speaker, but the problem is he's talking about things that really religious leaders don't have much business talking about financial policy. I mean, everyone can have their opinion, but in the public sector, this was about financial policy, not about moral issues, about human rights issues, about issues of freedom. And so ultimately Father Coughlin is kind of stopped by the federal government, but he was very, very popular with many people. So you can see not everybody loves FDR. Another group that doesn't necessarily love FDR is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court several times declared that FDR's programs were unconstitutional, that they were overstepping the bounds of the role of president. In 1937, FDR has the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill passed. And what it says is that when a justice of the Supreme Court turns 70, he is automatically retired. And this is because justices on the Supreme Court serve life terms unless they choose to retire. Well, the reason FDR was doing this is because some of the justices on the Supreme Court were voting against them, against FDR's programs, and they were also getting up in age. So they would be approaching that 70-year point pretty soon, which means FDR could appoint justices that he wanted. And the whole purpose of this, people said, was court packing, to make sure that the court would rule in his favor. Clearly, this is not going to last long, but it does show FDR is willing to expand the power traditionally held by the president in order to accomplish what he sees as essential for the American people. In terms of labor, there are some big changes that happen in the United States during the Great Depression. We've talked about unions before, but the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act, is created for the purpose of making sure that unions are allowed to function, and that when a union has a problem and strikes, the National Labor Relations Board, established by this act, will work to negotiate between the company and the unions, between the representatives for the workers. So this is seen as a huge step in the acceptance of unions, the way that the government wants unions to work because it wants to help workers. President Roosevelt even said that if he went to work in a factory, the first thing he would do is to join a union. So he's very, very pro-union. But there are some complications. The oldest national union is the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. And it is structured on sort of a traditional, almost guild structure, where the unions are organized by specific trades. So if you are a pipe fitter, if you are a plumber, if you do a specific job, you're a metal worker, you are organized according to your specific occupation. With this, the AFL can prevent certain groups from being admitted into the union. So some of these groups start their own union, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, and they are focused, instead of on the individual jobs, they focus on the entire industry. So car manufacturers or typewriter makers, whatever it is, they want to focus on the overall product rather than the individual jobs being done. Another thing that the CIO does that's different from the AFL is they welcome both women and African Americans who had previously been discriminated against and not allowed to join the AFL. So what we're starting to see is how industry in the United States is changing and how unions are being created to deal with those changes.